They mocked the black woman at the funeral, not knowing she was the civil rights lawyer who once made the police department kneel. The laughter wasn't just cruel. It was loud enough to echo through the sanctuary while the casket was still open. Did she get lost on her way to the courtroom? One man whispered, smirking. Another chuckled, wrong kind of black dress for a funeral. Huh? The woman they were mocking stood still. Her back was straight. Her eyes didn't blink. She hadn't come here for approval. She had come here for war. She just didn't expect to find it at her cousin's funeral. Her name was Valerie Monroe, 43, Harvard law grad, a national civil rights attorney known for taking on police unions and winning. She had led protests in Baltimore, cross-examined racist DAs in Alabama, and sued the NYPD on behalf of a boy who couldn't walk again. But none of that mattered to the bitter old women in wide-brimmed hats or the retired sheriff's son sulking in the third pew. In their eyes, she wasn't mourning. She was invading. And yet, this was her family, her blood. Her cousin, Dante Monroe, was in that casket, shot in the back 3 times while walking to his car in broad daylight. Police said he matched the description. Of course he did. Valerie had received the call 2 days earlier, in the middle of a deposition. She left the courtroom without grabbing her bag. When she arrived in Georgia that night, her aunt was curled on the living room floor. No one had offered legal help. No one had given her answers. The autopsy hadn't been released. No body camera footage. Just a bullet-riddled hoodie and a plastic bag with Dante's phone, cracked and bloody. Valerie didn't cry that night. She opened her laptop. By morning, she had filed a FOIA request, called the DOJ, and started drafting the lawsuit. But first the funeral. The church was old, wood-paneled, and heavy with silence. She hadn't been back here since her mother's funeral 12 years earlier. That day, they whispered about her for being too ambitious, too northern, too radical. Now they whispered the same things. But worse, because now, Valerie had power. They hated that. She's not even grieving right, hissed a woman behind her, just standing there like she owns the place. Valerie turned her head slowly, made eye contact, and said nothing. They turned away. Pastor Edmonds stood at the pulpit. He was nervous, kept glancing at her like he expected her to stand and object to the sermon. She didn't. She just stood near the casket, one hand on the edge. Her fingers lightly brushed the oak. Dante had been 25. No record. Graduated from Georgia State. He had helped Valerie organize a voter registration drive during the pandemic. Smart. Goofy. Always wearing those sneakers he swore were worth $1,000. Now he was cold and still, dressed in a borrowed suit from the funeral home. Valerie noticed the cut on his left knuckle. Defensive wound. Cowards, she muttered. After the final hymn, Valerie stepped outside and lit a cigarette. She didn't smoke. Not really. Just one every few years when the world was too heavy to swallow dry. She took a long drag, then another. That's when they approached her. 3 men, mid-50s, white, church deacons. They wore polite smiles like masks. Miss Monroe, one began. We wanted to extend our condolences and to ask that you keep things peaceful, for the sake of the family. Valerie stared at him. I buried my cousin today. You want peace. The second man cleared his throat. We just hope this doesn't become political. Valerie took another drag. He was shot in the back 3 times. You think that's apolitical? They didn't answer. She flicked the cigarette into the grass and crushed it under her heel. You're standing on a battlefield, she said quietly. But you already chose your side. She walked away before they could reply. Back at her hotel room, Valerie took off the black dress and slipped into sweats. She opened her laptop and started writing. The words came fast. Fury made her fingers faster. Within an hour, she had drafted a 27-page civil suit against the local police department, citing wrongful death, excessive force, and constitutional violations. She named the officer Derek McCall and requested all his disciplinary records. She didn't sleep that night, but she didn't need to. By morning, the news had already broken. Family of Georgia man killed by police retains high-profile civil rights lawyer. Attorney Valerie Monroe demands DOJ investigate officer-involved shooting in Greene County. She wasn't here to mourn quietly. She was here to make them pay. But the pushback came hard. By the second day, Fox affiliates were digging into Valerie's past. Radical lawyer targets small-town police, the headline read. Online forums claim she was anti-cop, anti-family, outside agitator. Anonymous threats flooded her inbox. One email simply read, You'll end up in the ground next to him. She forwarded it to the FBI, but it still made her stomach knot. At the next city council meeting, she showed up alone. She wore a gray suit, no makeup, and carried a thick binder. The room was packed. Some faces she remembered from the funeral now stonier. Others were new police wives, retired deputies, an off-duty cop sitting in the front row with his arms crossed. They tried to intimidate her. It didn't work. Valerie approached the microphone. My name is Valerie Monroe. I am here on behalf of the Monroe family, whose son was murdered by your officer less than 2 weeks ago. I used the word murdered deliberately. Gasps. A cough. Someone stood to walk out. Valerie didn't flinch. You may think this town is too small for consequence. You may think my name is just noise. But I promise you there will be accountability. She opened her binder and began reading off statistics. Your department has had 6 excessive force complaints in the last year. Your internal affairs division has 0 sustained findings. Your officers wear body cameras but refuse to release footage. A man in the back shouted, "Lies." Valerie paused, tilted her head slightly, then continued. You can shout me down, but you cannot silence the law, and you cannot kill the truth. When she finished, there was silence. Uncomfortable, dense. Then someone clapped. One woman, black, mid-60s. She stood. Then another man, and another. Soon a dozen people were on their feet, clapping as Valerie stepped back and gave a single nod. The police chief refused to speak that night, but Valerie had already recorded his silence. She walked out of that building the way she had walked into the funeral, calm, tall, unbroken. But the war was just beginning. By the 3rd week, Valerie had filed motions in both federal and state court. She was working out of a borrowed conference room at a community center where the Wi-Fi flickered every hour, but her focus never did. She skipped meals, ignored calls from her colleagues in D.C. who warned her she was pushing too hard, too fast. She didn't care. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here for blood. The body cam footage had not been released, so she subpoenaed it. When the city claimed technical issues, Valerie went to the press. She leaked portions of Officer McCall's personnel file, including a prior suspension for pulling a gun on a teenager during a traffic stop. He's a walking lawsuit, Valerie told the reporter. And the city gave him a badge. The story went viral. Activists began organizing rallies. Someone spray-painted Dante's "Life Mattered" on the police station sidewalk. Valerie didn't do it, but she didn't object either. She stood on the courthouse steps the next morning, surrounded by cameras, and read from the lawsuit again. 3 shots. No weapon. No warning. No justification. A man in a suit approached her afterward. He wore an expensive watch and a smug smile. You're not going to win, he said softly. Small towns protect their own. Valerie stepped closer. So do I. He blinked, walked away. But the walls were closing in. Officer McCall retained a high-profile defense team. Funded by a national police union, they accused Dante of being aggressive, uncooperative, suspected of carrying. Valerie expected that. What she didn't expect was the sheriff's department leaking Dante's sealed juvenile record as single misdemeanor from when he was 16. They were painting him as dangerous. Again, Valerie punched a wall that night in the community center bathroom. Her knuckles bled. She wrapped them in tissue and went back to work. But then came the turning point. A former officer named Theo Langley contacted her anonymously. Said he'd worked with McCall for 2 years. Said he'd seen things. Valerie met him in an empty diner at 2 a.m. I got out after McCall pulled his gun on a woman for jaywalking, Theo said, eyes darting. He likes the power. Likes people afraid of him. He once said, they only understand when they're on the ground. Valerie leaned in. Will you testify? Langley hesitated. My daughter's in this town. They'll make her life hell. Valerie nodded slowly. I'll protect her. I swear to you. He agreed. Her case just became iron. She amended the lawsuit to include a pattern of brutality. McCall's attorneys moved to dismiss. The judge denied it. Momentum was shifting, and the town could feel it. Valerie started getting looks at the grocery store. A white woman bumped her card into Valerie's, muttering troublemaker under her breath. At a gas station, someone slashed her tires. And once, late at night, she came home to find a dead squirrel nailed to her door. But she stayed. She didn't flinch. Her body was tired, her eyes hollow. But her will? Stronger than ever. Because then came the message that changed everything. An email from a young black woman named Desiree Green. She'd been on the sidewalk the day Dante was shot. She'd seen the whole thing and had filmed it on her phone. She hadn't shared it out of fear. But now she was ready. Valerie met her at a motel just outside city limits. Desiree was trembling. Valerie gave her tea, held her hand, and said, "You're doing something brave." They watched the footage together. The video was short, but devastating. Dante walking. Officer McCall yelling. No weapon visible. Just Dante turning then running. A second later, 3 loud cracks. Dante collapsing. No threat. No cause. Just murder. Valerie watched it twice. Then 3 more times. Then she exhaled, slowly. This will change everything. Desiree cried. Valerie held her. The next day, Valerie released the video. She sent it to every major news outlet, posted it on her legal blog, gave interviews on CNN and MSNBC. Protesters filled the courthouse steps. The DOJ launched a formal civil rights investigation. The governor was forced to make a statement. But it wasn't just about one officer now. It was about the system. Valerie made sure the lawsuit demanded more than compensation, it demanded reform. A citizen review board, mandatory body cam release laws, cultural competency training, public audits of police behavior. She didn't want just justice for Dante. She wanted to make sure no other cousin ended up in a box. But just as she was preparing for trial, Valerie got another call. Her Aunt Dante's mother had been hospitalized. Stroke. Brought on by stress and grief. Valerie rushed to her bedside, held her hand through the night. "I don't care about winning," her aunt whispered. "Just tell them he was good. My baby was good." Valerie broke down. For the first time in weeks, she sobbed. "I promise," she said. "I'll make them say it out loud." The courtroom was packed on opening day. Valerie stood alone at the plaintiff's table, her voice steady, her heart in pieces. She began with one sentence. "They said he matched the description." Then she paused. Let it hang in the air. They always do. Over the next 4 days, she presented evidence with surgical precision. Theo Langley testified. Desiree's video played on the big screen. McCall squirmed in his seat. Valerie's cross-examination was ruthless. "You fired 3 times," she said, "at an unarmed man who was running away. Explain that." McCall stuttered. "I feared for my life. But he wasn't facing you. I thought." "No, you didn't think. You reacted. Because of his skin." Objection. Overruled. Valerie pressed on. "You never even shouted a warning. Did you?" Silence. "You just shot." McCall's lawyer interrupted. But the damage was done. Valerie turned to the jury. 3 seconds. That's all it took. 3 seconds to turn a sidewalk into a grave. 3 seconds to steal a mother's joy. A cousin's laughter. A future. She pointed to the screen where Dante's photo smiling, alive, stared back. Now take 3 seconds and remember his name. On the 5th day, the jury deliberated. They returned in 3 hours. Verdict: liable. The damages: $6.5 million. But more importantly, the court ordered full policy reform in the Greene County Police Department. Officer McCall resigned. The police chief retired under pressure. And Valerie? She stood on the courthouse steps with her arm around her aunt. The press asked how she felt. Valerie looked at the cameras. "Dante didn't get to speak for himself," she said. "So I did. And I'm not done speaking yet." The months that followed were both a victory lap and a reckoning. Valerie returned to Washington, D.C. with a national spotlight trailing her every move. She didn't ask for fame, but it found her anyway. Invitations poured in. Panels, law schools, op-eds. Her inbox overflowed with messages from mothers, brothers, cousins of the fallen, each asking the same thing. "Can you help us too?" She tried. She really tried. But something in her had changed. It wasn't just that she'd won. It was what it had cost her to win. She no longer looked at the world like a lawyer chasing a precedent. She saw every streetlight as a potential memorial, every siren as a threat, every hoodie as a target. She woke at 3 a.m. gasping, sometimes hearing the gunshots from the video, sometimes hearing Dante laugh. She'd promised her aunt that the world would know he was good, but good didn't seem to be enough anymore. Still, she kept going. She used part of the settlement to fund a scholarship in Dante's name for students of color in law or criminal justice. The rest was managed by his mother, who used it to move out of Greene County and buy a house in Savannah with a porch and a garden her son would have loved. Valerie also returned to the courtroom, though less often. When she did, it was with even more fire. She took on 2 more police misconduct cases that year, both resulting in settlements. But the work weighed heavier. She no longer believed the courtroom alone could fix a system that was never designed for her people in the first place. That realization came sharply during a televised panel where a moderator asked, "Do you think justice was truly served in Dante Monroe's case?" Valerie paused. The cameras zoomed in. "No," she said softly. "Justice would mean he was still alive." The room fell quiet. "But accountability," she added. "Yes. And sometimes that's all we have to fight for until we can build something better." That clip went viral. Again. And that was when it happened. 2 years after the funeral, Valerie was invited back to Georgia this time, not to fight, but to receive an award. The city had changed since the lawsuit. A new mayor, a restructured police department, a citizen review board that actually had teeth. There was still tension, yes, but there was also progress. They held the ceremony at the same church where she had been mocked. Same pews, same faded carpet, but a different tone entirely. This time, when she walked in, no one whispered. They stood. All of them, including the pastor. He greeted her at the pulpit, smiled, and said, "Miss Monroe, or shall I say, Counselor Monroe, we're honored to have you back. And we apologize for not knowing who you were before. But even more so, we apologize for not treating you as someone worthy of respect from the beginning." Valerie's hands trembled as she walked to the podium. The same wood she had leaned on, knuckles white with rage, now felt warm beneath her palms. She looked out at the crowd, at the children in the front row, wide-eyed, at her aunt, sitting straighter now, stronger, at the same woman who once whispered behind her now holding tissues and nodding. She didn't read a speech, didn't need one. Instead, she told them what Dante was like as a kid, how he used to prank her by replacing her shampoo with glue, how he once broke his wrist trying to climb her apartment balcony to surprise her on her birthday, how he dreamed of opening a bookstore that doubled as a community center. She ended by saying, Dante mattered. He mattered before the lawsuit, before the cameras. He mattered because he was loved. And then, her voice cracking, "And I will never stop fighting for the ones you don't see until it's too late." She stepped down to a standing ovation. Outside the church, the Georgia summer sun hit hard. But Valerie didn't mind. She looked across the street and saw something that made her heart clench. The town had renamed the park beside the courthouse Dante Monroe Memorial Green. There was a plaque with his name, his story, and a quote from Valerie etched into the stone. They said he matched the description. We made sure the world knew his name. She stood before it in silence. Then someone approached her. A teenage girl, maybe 16, dark skin, braids, holding a folder. "You're Valerie Monroe, right?" she asked nervously. Valerie smiled. "Yes. Do want to be a civil rights lawyer. Like you." Valerie's eyes welled up. She took the folder. It was a personal essay about police stops, fear, and hope. "You already are like me," Valerie said, handing it back. "Because you're not waiting to be seen. You're speaking." The girl beamed. That night, Valerie sat alone at her hotel, looking out the window at a town that once spat her name like venom, now whispering it with something like gratitude. But she didn't confuse acceptance with completion. She knew there was more to do. She opened her laptop again, started drafting a new case. This one from Mississippi. Another boy. Another bullet. Another name the world would learn. Because Valerie Monroe was not done kneeling in courtrooms. Not until justice stood tall in every city, for every child, and especially for those who were mocked, dismissed, or ignored. Just like they once mocked her.